I'm sure that you would like to think that you're normal. I know, I do. But then I think about what I'm really like, and I realize that in many ways, I'm actually not very normal at all. For you, there's probably bits of your life that aren't that normal either, but are you or I don't know, in the middle of the desert looking for UFOs with a bunch of other believers and an ex-member of Take That? Have you ever tried to split an atom in your kitchen? Are you currently a member of the KKK? No? Well then, you're probably pretty normal. Me too. Additionally, the chances that Jon Ronson will want to chat with you for his next book or his next documentary are very, very slim. Because for 25 years, Welsh journalist Jon Ronson has been spending time with the absolute fringes of our communities. He gets so deep in with these people to truly humanize them. It's wonderful to see. And it's very useful for him too, especially, well, there was that time that he was outed as a Jew in the middle of a jihadi training camp. He's got a wonderful, quick-witted charm about him and a self-deprecating way of being that probably saved his life. One of Jon's most famous books is called The Psychopath Test. And he's actually touring a live event to Australia, kind of built around that book. He's doing it before the end of the year. I, for one, am absolutely thrilled by that, because if this conversation that you're about to hear, if this conversation is anything to go by, the chance to spend an evening with a person who has spent evenings with the most extreme, the most terrifying, the most ideological humans on the planet, the chance to spend it with someone like that sounds incredibly comforting. He's utterly charming. I can't wait for you to meet him. Well, you know what it is, and you've done it a squillion times, where you take 18 hours of planes to get somewhere, and your half an hour with someone turns into 12 minutes with someone, turns into 8 minutes with someone, turns into them finding a coffee for 3 minutes, and you're like, fuck, I've got 4 minutes. Yeah, 800 frames. Shit. You've done it.
That's funny. That just unlocked a memory of the last time I was coming to Australia.
Yeah.
And I was on the plane and I was listening to Michael Palin's diary, like his around the world diary. Oh. And I was just thinking, it was like day 4, Belize. And I was thinking, like, I'm not getting any sleep here. And then suddenly it was day 390. It's like, oh, okay, I got some sleep.
My dad gave me the book of that show when I was a kid. And as you mentioned that, I was like, gone are the days where you can show up to the BBC and go, hello, I used to be in Monty Python. I'd like you to pay for me and a film crew shooting on 16 millimeter to go around the world for a year. And they go, great, done.
You're right. Those days are gone. The first time I wrote a story for American GQ, I was interviewing a robot. I was interviewing a robot built by a billionaire called Martin Rothblatt. This is an amazing story. Well, I'll tell you the story quite quickly and then get to the point of why I told
I'm just glad.
it to you.
I mean, I think if you're going to join the billionaires club, you're going to need a name that sounds like that.
Right. Well, okay. So Martin Rothblatt, born Martin, trans woman, as a child, went round NASA, had a brainwave, thought, this is a regular kid in Chicago, thought if I knew how to double the strength of satellites, I could shrink the size of satellite dishes. And in that moment, invented the concept of satellite radio for cars. Set up the Sirius network, became a billionaire, married this woman called Bina, they had a kid. Then the kid is diagnosed with an untreatable lung condition called pulmonary hypertension. Martin goes to the library and invents a treatment for pulmonary hypertension, becomes a billionaire a second time over. Anyway, by the time I entered Martin's orbit, she was trying to create a conscious, sentient robot based on her real-life partner, Bina. So I went off to interview Bina the robot, apparently the most sentient robot in the world. I got to say, not that sentient. But I think it's something interesting. When you interview a robot, you feel the need to ask it like profound questions. Like I said, what does electricity taste like?
Yeah.
And Bina replied, like a planet around a star, which is either like awesome or meaningless. Anyway, the reason why I tell you that story was the whole time, the whole like 5 hours I was interviewing Bina, there was a limo outside that GQ had paid for. And those days have gone. My God, you're lucky if you get splashed by a puddle that a limo drives over.
We've texted you an Uber voucher. Let us know if you can't access it and we'll reimburse you. They're never going to reimburse you, ever.
Yeah. I can't believe that GQ paid for a limo to sit there while I interviewed a robot.
Well, man, that's good on you, Martine. Sometimes you get big brains, and well, at least when in the world of billionaires, I'm not the first person to say it, but if you're a billionaire, someone's getting exploited somewhere, right?
Well, this gets to the heart of I'm not saying that Martine is a psychopath. I'm certain that Martine isn't.
No, you touch on your work here. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I wrote a book called The Psychopath Test, which I'm bringing to Australia and New Zealand.
Good getting the plug in. With only not even 5 minutes and you're already there. I love a good call to action, Ronson. Good stuff.
Well, it speaks to the very thing you just made up, which is, does our society reward psychopathic character traits? Do we, of all the mental disorders, psychopathy is the worst of all the mental disorders, and yet is that the one that we reward by making them our CEOs, our business leaders, our religious leaders, our presidents, and so on? And what does it say about society if that's the mental disorder that we're rewarding, the one that gives the person no empathy, no remorse, no guilt?
For people that might not have not seen your work or wondering who's this guy that we're talking about and how can a person become a business leader and be a psychopath, this thing that we're taught from all the horror movies to be afraid of. I'm going to hold, hang on, where is it? Okay, so I'm going to hold this phone in my hand, right? This phone, in the words of one of my favorite podcasters, Blind Boy, this phone is dripping in blood. All right. The amount of minerals that had to get mined in terrible conditions for this thing to get made is bonkers.
I thought you were going to say the amount of true crime podcasts you've been listening to. That's why it's dripping in blood.
No. But if you're the CEO of Apple, right, you know where this stuff comes from. And in your heart, in your brain, you're making a moral choice, profit over people. And you go, yes, I'll make the iPhone 17 Super Max. And there you go. And you have to just switch the other empathy part off to make that money. And that's how you become the most profitable company in the history of the world.
So psychopaths make up 25% of the prison population, but they are responsible for 60 to 70% of unrest inside prisons. So move that to the business world.
Wow.
Let's say the head of Apple isn't a psychopath, but the head of a rival cell phone company is. That means everybody has to be a little bit more psychopathic to keep up. So they're smaller number, but the ripples are big. Because people will,
we're recording this on the day of the Republican National Convention. So this is the day that Trump is going to take the stage, right? And if it's anything like last time, as I've heard you mention in the past, an empty podium waiting for him to walk up to it is more exciting than anything else. And that's probably that's going to be like an hour of television today. And people will see him speak and watch him lie 4 times a minute. And people will go, the guy's a psychopath. You probably know more about psychopaths than anybody I'm going to speak to, besides my own psychiatrist, who knows a lot about it. He does forensic stuff, I'm sure. To be a leader like Donald Trump, do you have to be a psychopath, do you think?
I don't know what particular disorder Trump has. It's possible. And also, of course, it's kind of psychopathic to be an armchair diagnoser of other people with psychopathy. Much of what I do in the psychopath test is talk about how the skills of learning how to spot psychopaths can turn you into a bit of a psychopath too. You get drunk with your power and you define people by their maddest edges. However, Trump's been in our lives for a long time now. He's been in our lives as a politician since 2015, for 9 years now. So, you could argue we've seen enough of Trump now to be able to give him some kind of diagnosis. So my next question is, okay, the difference between a psychopath and a narcissist is a narcissist has a lot of stuff going on under the surface. They're wounded. There's a lot of emotions, and that means that they lash out. With a psychopath, what's going on under the surface is nothing. Like, it's just emptiness. So when you look at Trump, which of those two feels right?
Probably the former.
I kind of think that, yeah.
I listen to a lot of Scaramucci, who worked with him quite closely, and the way the Scaramucci talks about him, it's, I would say, the former, and that's firsthand experience.
Yeah, I think narcissists are really interesting, especially kind of covert narcissists, the ones who you just don't know. It's kind of more interesting because they're not wearing it on their sleeves in the way that Trump does. But I think psychopaths are more interesting than narcissists because it's just a certain set of characteristics. This idea that all of the charm is superficial, there's nothing going on underneath. They look and act like regular people, but some people would argue that they're nothing like regular people. They're more like predatory animals. You know, the amygdala underperforms. They see the world in terms of predators and prey, and it would be foolish not to exploit weaknesses in others. And yeah, I think Trump probably is more likely to be a narcissist than a psychopath, although I don't know for sure.
Because there's two combinations that are happening. There's, as I mentioned, we're at the Republican National Convention today, but it's a common thing to do. It's people do it all the time. They go to a rally or a gun fair or somewhere where there's a giant amount of polarized people. They do it out the front of Coachella talking to hot girls in Native American headdresses, right? It is to kind of almost gotcha and, naively interview someone on camera to get them to admit something. What happens when the super confident narcissist meets the ideologue? What happens when that magic happens?
Right. Well, that's a very interesting question, and obviously that's what we're seeing. Trump speaking tonight, I was there 8 years ago in Cleveland.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. I was accidentally, by the way, sitting in the disabled area, which meant that I was desperate for the toilet for most of Trump's speech, but I couldn't get out because all the aisles was people in wheelchairs.
Yeah.
So it was a very unpleasant situation for me for more than one reason. He never stopped talking. I couldn't get out. I was dying for the toilet. Anyway, the most memorable line from that speech was, "I alone can fix things. I alone can fix it."
Yeah.
I wonder whether things are going to be different this time around. And I think he's going to pretend to be more, I hope not pretend, I hope he's got it in him to be more conciliatory, more unifying. It doesn't mean he means it, but it would be nice if he does it.
Because there's a thing that happens, and we've seen it throughout history, when a certain level of anxiety rises in a population about unemployment, about cost of living, about national security, for example, about some moral panic sometimes. And that level of anxiety gets to this point, and no one in leadership is doing anything about it. And then a person comes along and says something like that, "I alone can do this." And then there's this great sense of, oh, thank fuck for that. I don't care about everything else. I just want this icky feeling inside me to go away. Boom, you got my vote. And then now you get Silvio Berlusconi or what's his mate in Venezuela, and like these are all democratically elected people. The whole strongman thing rises because of it. And I wonder, is the antidote to that teaching the populace more about down regulation and recognizing their own anxiety and being more rational and being inoculated to fear-based messaging?
Well, that's really interesting. So let me go back to Cleveland Republican Convention 2016. The reason why I was there was because my old pal, who I interviewed 30 years ago, Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist, was there.
Yeah.
35 years ago, me and Alex Jones snuck into Bohemian Grove together and had this wild adventure. And I had no idea that one day he would have the ear of a president.
Wow.
And that goes back to that earlier thing that you said about when narcissists and ideologues meet. Because Trump and Alex really did enable each other's bad behavior. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty convinced that Alex kind of gave Trump permission to be more conspiratorial, and Trump gave Alex permission to be more kind of xenophobic. Alex wasn't a xenophobe in his early days. His interest was things like, government overreach, Waco, Ruby Ridge, and so on. But suddenly when he hooks up with Trump, he starts talking about the Muslims, are coming in and taking over. And, his rhetoric completely changed. And then Trump was appealing to Alex's conspiratorial base. So, yeah, that was it felt to me like a very toxic combination. And yes, I think teaching people critical thinking and rationality is incredibly important.
How, in your mind, over the course of your career, you've seen us going down this path, do you feel a correction may be coming?
Well, it's so interesting. I think grappling with, not just in the media, but in many worlds, we're sort of edging towards a post-institution society where all the old gatekeepers don't hold any sway anymore. People are becoming personal brands. Everybody's setting up their own. Tucker Carlson gets fired from Fox. He can go to Rumble, or he can go to X now. God, that's the first time I've actually said X, not Twitter.
Wow.
Clearly, it's
I haven't been there in some time, mate.
So, yeah, it's a really interesting thing to grapple with. What are the consequences of that? That's actually something I'm looking at for my next book, in fact, because I think it's one of the biggest, most seismic changes in my lifetime. It's, in many ways, I think it's a positive thing. Like I spent years battling gatekeepers in the early years of my career, begging TV stations to give me a chance and all of that. And it was very frustrating to be kind of powerless in the face of hierarchies and ideologies and changing trends or whatever. So in many ways, this kind of post-gatekeeper society is a positive thing. I think the legacy media had too much power, got things wrong, excluded certain voices. There's all sorts of reasons why we needed something like YouTube and then eventually, Rumble and all of those other places to come along. But we really have to also deal with the fact that a post-institution world where anything goes, any kind of shit goes, any lies or whatever, is going to have real consequences too. So I think we have to sort of both grapple with the reasons why we've entered this new world and what's going to happen next.
I have a one-woman focus group in my house. My stepdaughter, who was 10 when I met her, she's now 20. And I see the way that her and her cohort interact online. And I wonder, this idea of, do I really want everything documented forever, ever, always? I wonder if you can see a correction coming in that generation.
Yes, you're not the first person to have said that to me. Not just we don't want to be on social media all the time documenting everything, but also, do we really want to have this draconian set of rules where we, disproportionately punish people for some kind of minor transgression? I'm really interested that you said that, and I say you're not the only person who said that to me. I think a new generation is coming along to correct what they see as, was the wrongs of their older siblings, like quote unquote cancel culture, like being too idealistic and open on the internet, because it's a minefield. In the early days, everyone was just so excited about the possibilities of social media, and I mean, God, nobody's excited anymore. So I think it's only positive. This book's just come out that's causing a lot of waves. And the main thesis by Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. Yeah. And his main thing is we should ban cell phones in kids and under 16s, under 18s. When I first heard that, I thought, I don't really agree with that. Like, I think a better thing is for them to come to it themselves, that they don't want to use their phones as much. So hearing you say that feels very positive and refreshing for that reason.
But she's now on the other side of that part of her life. But then I see it in, I have other mates who've got kids who are like, I don't know how he did it, but he managed to keep his daughter off a mobile phone until she was 16. It was just,
wow.
I don't know how he did it, but he did it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had a fucking chance with my son. Yeah. Maybe I'm just saying that because I failed in it so badly. But I've got to say,
I watched my 4-year-old unlock his mum's phone last night. It's like, honey, you're going to have to change your code now. And she goes, no, I'll give him 3 chances. Like, no, you fucking no. Because I don't want that boy clicking on TikTok and seeing some shit, some fucking beheading or something. No. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. But how positive for kids to come to that realization themselves.
Mm.
For me, that feels like, you don't want more laws in the world.
Nah.
What you want is for people to come to the realization themselves.
Can I ask about how, because I've seen you on stage and you do claim to be a socially awkward person, but my career, I've been on in broadcasting for 30 years now, and I came up through music myself, and so my career is spent on stage, in front of millions of people, live television, or just in front of thousands of people in a room. You do it very well. And so while you do claim to be socially awkward, I'm going to say that you do command the room very well. And might I add, you and I have something in common in that the attention to detail is extraordinarily important, in that we share a common characteristic in that excellent, well-thought T-shirt choice is vital. When you did your first TED Talk and you're wearing your Overlook Hotel, I'm like, I know, buddy. Yeah. I see ya.
I know. I was proud of that little Easter egg, I got to say.
It was a treat.
Yeah. I feel very lucky, genuinely very lucky, that my social anxiety and all of my fucked upness doesn't manifest on stage. It manifests in dinner parties, busy bars, where I just can't bear to be there, I need to get the hell out. So thank God, just thank God. I can't say it's not like I'm dying to get on stage, but I feel very relieved that I for some reason, I have the ability to do it well.
Is it a sense of control when you're up there?
It definitely helps that I can't see people's faces because the lights are in your eyes. That helps a lot, right? And I'm sort of on my own, like the whole stage, unless I have guests, which I will be having and do have. You're kind of on your own. So the people in the audience become a bit more sort of theoretical. At the end of the Q&A, the lights come up and you can see everyone. And sometimes it gives me a little bit of a shock because you haven't seen any of them until then. But is it control? There's a moment, Bruce Springsteen talks about how, his father always shouted at him. He never felt like he could talk at home. So that's why he'll now go on stage for like 3.5 hours every night where he's like, where everybody just has to listen to him. Like, that's not me. That's not what it is. But it's more just like feeling, God, I for some mad reason, I do this okay. So I might as well just keep doing it. And also, if I'm like dying on stage, here's something really weird. Like if I'm dying, if it's not working, a little big piece of me, of my brain, thinks, right, I'm going to turn this around. Not like, and thank God, I don't know, thank God I've just got that, because there's nothing else in my life or personality that would make you think that would happen. But yeah, if I'm dying on stage, I'm not like sweating and thinking, fuck it, I need to get off stage. I'm thinking I'm going to win them over. It's weird. I'm just glad.
Do you have, because you and Brian Cox have in common in that you early in your careers you developed a skill set by playing keyboards in bands, going on the road.
This was more successful than mine.
Things can only get better from here, Jon. So what was it that you learned from your days in the back of a Ford Ford Transit van running up and down the M6 on tour? What is it that you learned from those days that you still carry with you?
It was Alice through the looking glass. Certainly in terms of having adventures, like getting out of your world and going into new worlds. That's kind of what I fell in love with, being in a band. And the singer of my band wore a big fake head that he never took off, which made him even more mysterious and, feeling like Alice in Wonderland. So it was the Wonderland aspect. It was this like, I want to have adventures, go to shadowy places, carry on this absurd life that suddenly is happening to me. Yeah, that's what I learned.
It is, the closest you can get to being a pirate. You're basically going from town to town. Yeah. And there's plenty of bands that wrote songs about going from town to town marauding. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking I never loved that aspect of it quite so much, especially in a lowly paid van where quite often you're not spending the night in a hotel. You're getting home at 4 a.m. and then you have to unload all of your stuff before you can get to go to bed. So yeah, that aspect of it, I don't think I even loved, even in my early 20s. Did I love that?
But now you show up with a, with a USB stick and a clicker, and your tour manager walks you on stage, and that's it. There's no load in, there's no load out.
There's a weirdness though, because you're not traveling and you're not doing all of that stuff. The weirdness is that the days are like twilight days. You're just kind of sitting there waiting for the evening to come for you to go on stage, because you're not going to write, because then you just tire yourself out and not be any good on stage. So so the upside is you just waltz on stage, but the downside is you've lived a twilight day.
There was an Australian band called Grinspoon whose documentary, their road documentary of one tour, was called 23 Hours of Waiting Around.
Right. Yeah. There's something bleak about that. That's bleak.
There was the Charlie Watts quote. He's dead now, but he was a drummer from the Rolling Stones. He said, it was at the 40th anniversary, I think. He said, if I've been in the Rolling Stones for 40 years, I reckon 18 months of that was playing. The rest was just waiting around.
Right. At least there's some solace to knowing that everyone's in the same boat. Right. I think that we all have to go through this weirdness. Mentioning Bruce Springsteen again, when he pops up on my Instagram and I see what he's doing in the day, before he goes on stage that evening, he's going around to Shane McGowan's house. He's going to hospitals. He's meeting children.
He's where do you get man? He pushes iron.
Yeah, he pushes hard, that guy. He really does.
He lifts a lot. He's quite a fair bit older than me. But years ago, I had a massage in a hotel from someone, like a legit one, don't get me wrong. And she said, I had Bruce Springsteen under my thumbs last week. And I said, oh, really? What was that like? She goes, that man lifts a lot of weights. He's just made out of anchor rope. And I thought, fucking hell, man. He wrote Born to Run at 24, and now he's in his mid-50s, and he's made out of anchor rope. Well, there you go. Good on you, boss.
Wow. God, he has very full days, Bruce Springsteen. And I think when he's not doing everything we just talked about, he's like riding on his motorbike. He's like, I'm famous. I saw him play in Albany in New York a couple of months ago, and so he's on my mind a lot because I felt like I'd seen Jesus.
Well, I hope that was the show where Nick Cave was dancing side of stage next to Sting, which was an extraordinary piece of backstage footage.
I saw that footage, but no, sadly.
Speaking of, physicality, there is an element to your work, and I don't like to use the word process, but ultimately I know it's a part of mine, where walking is a big part of how you come up with ideas and how you marinate on things. Can you talk to me about the role of not doing the thing that you need to do for your job in order to get the ideas to do the thing you need to do for your job?
Yeah, totally. Well, certainly going to a new place, sometimes if you're blocked, going to another room or going for a walk, it does seem to unlock you. But more than that, so many of my stories come from just a tiny moment in an otherwise really boring academic book. From the Psychopath Test through to my new show, Things Fell Apart. I found so many stories that way. A really boring audiobook, and there's a tiny little gem in there where you just think, I didn't expect that. And I just can't think of anything more depressing than sitting there reading a big academic book on a sofa, getting fat, not moving, not getting any exercise. So I would much prefer to be listening to a 10-hour audiobook. And I'm just walking and walking and walking. And I'll walk 15, 20 miles listening to one of these books. The only downside is if you're hiking and you see a squirrel, you miss a paragraph. It's like, oh, squirrel. So you've got to remember to concentrate. But what gives me real solace is often I'm worried, is my attention going to go? Am I going to miss this moment that could be the most amazing story? And you never know, maybe you have. But very often, suddenly when I'm thinking that, I just hear something and that's the moment. So it's like there's a part of your brain that's still alive, even if you don't know that it is, where it's listening out for this moment of mystery. That's the moment. It's like mystery. I didn't expect that. I want to go down a rabbit hole to learn more about that. That's what you're looking for.
What do the people in your family say about you if you haven't gone for a hike in a little while?
Well, it never happens. I go for a hike like every day.
All right.
Like I 7 days a week, I'll either run or have a hike or something like that. Yeah, I'm very work motivated. All I do is work.
How does that play out for someone who's got kids?
Well, he's mid-20s now, so he doesn't need me anymore.
Yeah, but when
And
they
my
were little, surely, there was like, hey,
oh
John,
yeah,
remember this guy?
no. When he was little, I took time off. Like I gave up traveling. I started writing a column about my domestic life in The Guardian so I could stay home more and be more with my son. But the irony is that then you start desperately hoping. It's a weekly column. So you start desperately hoping that something will go wrong, like something bad will happen. So you'll have something to write about. So the irony is that, my quest to be a more present father meant that I was like writing about, bad things happening with my son in The Guardian. So it kind of turned me into a worse father. So I sort of, yeah. So if you're thinking about writing a column about your domestic life, it's a good idea not to do it. So yeah, but the upshot is I gave it up for a good number of years, and I cut down my work for a good number of years. But now he's left home. I just work all the time. It's the thing that brings the joy. And my wife doesn't mind because we've been together so long. We don't we don't need to be walking around holding hands. We give each other space to do our thing.
What do you think is different about your relationship to relationships that haven't lasted as long?
It's space. It's not putting any pressure on the other person and just letting them do whatever they want, basically. No guilt, no pressure. Yeah, if they want to go away and you're left with the extremely old dog that won't stop coughing, do it. Let them go away, and vice versa. So that's a particular moment that's happening in my life right now. By the way, our dog won't stop coughing.
Why do we choose pets that don't live as long as we do? My God.
Yeah, I know. It was a few years ago when I was lying in bed. I was a bit depressed. I'd been working on this podcast called The Last Days of August that had made me a bit depressed because it was such a, bleak story about the death of a porn star for Audible. Anyway, I just remember lying there with my two dogs thinking, I want to die before you. Like, I don't want to. But now that one of them is dead and the other one's about to die, I don't feel that way anymore. I'm kind of quite glad that they're dying before me.
I think I'm going to push for Galapagos turtles or African grey parrots, both of which outlive humans.
Right. Yeah, see, that's the part of the world that you're living in where those things are an option. We have no option. We're nowhere near Galapagos.
Oh, you can't keep either of those things as pets here. You can't even keep a fucking wombat, even though they're endangered. I'd love to keep a wombat. They're cuddly. They're delightful. They do cubic poo. They're amazing animals.
I tell you what's slightly overrated of kangaroos. They're a little. I went to a kangaroo sanctuary when I was in Brisbane last time I was over.
It was near my old house, yeah.
Oh, really? A little grumpy, a little standoffish, a bit like goats in that way. Didn't love them. I did love the koala, though. That I loved. And I held the koala and got my picture taken, and then in the room where you pay, there's pictures of like Elvis Costello holding a koala.
Lone Pine, that's where I grew up. That was my early BMX day riding was all around that area. That is where I grew up, and those kangaroos that you saw, they are. I'm not going to say they're the circus elephant version of the kangaroo, but they've all lived there their entire lives. They've never seen the wild. They're all the children and grandchildren of the kangaroos that have always lived there. And they're like, nah, unless you've got snacks for me, I'm fucking staying here. Fuck off.
Okay, well, it's good to know that they were like, that there's better kangaroos living in better situations.
Oh, yeah, there's ones that'll fuck you up if you get in their space. And if you're driving at night, don't. Just don't. Because they're bigger than a human and they will destroy your car and you. And it's a bad time. It's a real bad time.
Yeah.
Over time, certainly since COVID, many of us, and I heard you talk about it, people we really care about, we've seen them just fall off the edge of reality, into this wild ideological place that doesn't have a relationship to the rest of the world that other people live in. You have spoken to more people who live there than anyone I've ever spoken to. So I don't feel so afraid And so people may perhaps don't feel so afraid of this shit happening again or worse. What do we need to know about people who exist in that space where they're literally operating in a parallel universe that just happens to breathe the same atmosphere that we do?
It's, well, such interesting questions you raise. One thing I'd say, I don't want to sound too much like a New Yorker, but I was just reading in the New Yorker an interesting article about how maybe we should think of people who believe, completely irrational things like QAnon or Pizzagate or Flat Earth, as maybe we should think of them more like religious believers, that these are symbolic beliefs, not real beliefs. The point that this article was making that I thought was very interesting, and sort of spoke to something that's kind of been in my mind too, is, religious people tend not to act at home like God is watching them. They will act in ungodly ways when they're not, when nobody sees them. So that means they're not real believers. It's more like a symbolic belief. And so maybe the same is true for the believers in QAnon and so on. However, at the same time, I would also say that we are, all of us, not just people on the right, obviously, everybody is susceptible to conspiratorial thinking. Just look at what happened after the assassination attempt on Trump. Suddenly it was the left who were all saying, it's an inside job, it's staged, it's a post-flag operation, all the things that we've been mocking the right for all of this time. Another interesting thing I read was people reporting on the shooting at Pizzagate at the Comet Ping Pong restaurant in Washington, D.C., where the guy came in and, tried to rescue the kidnapped children who'd been like sex slaved by Hillary Clinton. The people reporting on that don't say something which is, that almost never happens. It almost never happens. There was loads of people at QAnon, and they didn't do that very often. It happens sometimes, true, but it doesn't happen that much. There's this whole thing on the left about how MAGA people and militia people are all white supremacists secretly plotting to kickstart an ethnic-based civil war. And I just don't think there's any truth to that at all. I think there's not very much racism in that world. It's much more an anti-government thing, an anti-institution thing. And the reason why people think that, academics on the left think that, is because when civil wars start in other countries like Bosnia or Rwanda, it's always ethnic based, it's always tribal based. So if civil war is going to start in America, it must be ethnic based. So it's almost like a sort of false mathematical equation. So all of this is to say, maybe in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, this is going to seem very naive. I don't think anything particularly bad's going to happen. I don't think the right is going to kickstart some sort of civil war. In fact, if there's any political violence, it's going to come from the left. True, at Charlottesville, you had all of those Jews who will not replace us. You've got a resurgence of anti-Semitism coming from the left as well as from the right. So I'm not saying it's like plain sailing, but what I am saying is that there's a certain amount of paranoia in thinking that all of these kids with, gun clubs in Michigan are all, plotting to start a civil war. That's just, overblown and not true and dangerous, because it means that, you demonize them and they get more and more angry, and, the problems are on both sides.
You're right. I mean, my brother and his husband live in Michigan, and they had people with AR-15s try to take over the governor's house. It's not happening.
Yeah, it's not nothing. But it's not nothing, but it's also overblown on the left, I'd say, is what's going on there.
How much of what we see when we see the froth and the bluster and whether it be someone writing in a comment box or someone standing on the street going this, that, the other, but Jews will not replace us. How much of that is, I feel this in my heart, or I'm saying this because I want the people around me to think I'm okay so I don't feel so alone?
That's really interesting. I think anti-Semitism, I'm Jewish, and so I've been sort of noticing, the sort of rise in anti-Semitism, especially since, October the 7th. But before too, David Baddiel wrote his book, Jews Don't Count, back in, 4 or 5 years ago, about how there was a rise of anti-Semitism on the left and how people conflate Israeli government policy with the Jews and so on in a way that you wouldn't do with other cultures. And that feels real. That feels real, I've got to say. It feels like they really don't like us. It's really in their heart. And that's coming from both sides. It's coming from, from the right and the left. That's a kind of bleak way of looking at it, but that doesn't feel performative to me.
It's because that thing itself is bananas. You've as I said, you've been in the homes of people. You've put yourself at great peril to go and speak with people who have quite publicly said, we want to kill people like you, or we support you not having any rights or anything like that. When you see, and I went to a gig, went to go see a mate's band play at a university here, and it was like 90 tents in the quadrangle, with all kinds of flags. And I saw pride flags hanging amongst Palestinian flags. And I'm thinking, like, do you know what happens? Come on, man. Like, you probably don't wear leather shoes because you're worried about the cows. What do you think is happening, and the dissonance that people are having to hold in their heads at the same time when they're trying to find the thing?
I actually live right on the Pride route in New York City. I've got an apartment, down in Greenwich Village, and so I saw that. I saw an awful lot of pro-Palestinian, banners. I couldn't work out whether some weren't like official Pride floats, some were like people infiltrating and trying to disrupt the march.
Right.
Yeah, that definitely was happening. But yeah, it's this idea that Judaism is equitable with white supremacy seems to be a kind of, feeling among some people in the left. Sometimes it's just a slip. There was this big case in Britain of this incredibly anti-Semitic mural that turned up in Shoreditch or Hackney in East London, which had all the tropes of, the sort of Jewish bankers controlling the world. And Jeremy Corbyn, who was the head of the Labour Party at the time over here, liked the Facebook post about it. And I think that was two things at once. That was both, upsetting and disconcerting for Jews, but also arguably for some other people, it was a misunderstanding. Like, some people were liking that picture, not realising that there was all this anti-Semitic imagery in there. But yeah, the dissonance is it's upsetting. Like, I find this all upsetting.
Oh yeah.
A friend of mine, somebody who I really like as a friend and admire as a person, gave an interview where they said that Jewish journalists in New York should declare whether or not they went to Israel as teenagers, so we would know whether or not to trust them, because maybe they were brainwashed by the Israeli government.
Oh boy.
And that just, really disheartened me. I just thought, you wouldn't say that about other minority groups.
You wouldn't say that about someone from Uganda.
No, you wouldn't say it about anyone. You wouldn't say it about Irish people. You wouldn't say it about Muslims. You wouldn't say it about anybody. So, that felt like a shift.
Yeah. How much of that kind of stuff is, I'm saying this because I truly believe it, or I'm saying it because I want to feel a part of something? Or I want to feel less alone. I'm saying this stuff because I want to feel less alone. If I speak in this way, then these people who look powerful and look organized and look like they know what's going on, I get to stand with them, because then I'll feel less alone than over here by myself, just worried.
That's certainly what was happening in the stories that I wrote about in my book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, about the sort of early days of what became known as cancel culture. And there was absolutely a sort of a sense of, group enjoyment. The main story of that book was the Justine Sacco story. She tweets, I go to Africa, I hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white. And then when she was asleep on the plane, my book sort of dissects everything that happened while she was asleep and oblivious. And absolutely all of these groups were just joyfully, supporting each other for, and egging each other on. And there was this sort of group joy. And it was so many groups, by the way, that night, everyone from kind of misogynists through to social justice people, through to hipsters, like all of these different groups are all having great fun, group identifying by destroying this person who was asleep on a plane and oblivious to everything that was going on. So yeah, I'd say in that book it was very much about groups, about feeling part of a group, feeling part of something, and also thinking you were doing something morally right. It's no surprise that many social scientists over the years have shown that people behave more violently when they think they're doing it in the service of a moral good.
Yeah, and that's wild. I remember a director of mine, when I worked for this music TV channel, we would often do these big live things. There was bands, there was thousands of kids. I'd been involved in riots and stuff before, so I was aware of how badly everything could go. And he just said to me, "You've got the microphone. All people need is permission to behave. If you tell them to dance and look after each other, they'll dance and look after each other. If you tell them to riot, they'll riot. It's up to you." Because that's all people want. People look for a clue. Oh, we can do this? Yeah. Great. All they want is permission and the choice not to be theirs, and away they go. And I was just, everybody else was. And yeah, it's fascinating. I think, group crowds and what happens to our decision-making when there's social proof is extraordinary. It can happen incredibly quickly. Like, as I mentioned, I've been in riots, and fuck me, man. It can turn within 5 seconds.
Absolutely. I ran a little bit about crowd theory, actually, in Saving Publicly Shamed. There was this terrible French guy in the 19th century called Gustave Le Bon, who wrote this book about crowds. I can't remember, was it called The Wisdom of Crowd? I can't remember. Or the something of crowds. Anyway, like his line was that, which I think is wrong, is that, in a crowd, man is no different from a grain of sand being like pushed and pulled by the wind. He basically described, man in the crowd will descend to the level of a child or a woman. He was a real asshole. Anyway.
I don't agree with the last part, but I can relate to the first bit.
Well, okay, let me give you a counter argument to that. Because yes, at first you think, maybe we are just like grains of sand in the wind. But this massive riot unfolded in London, I can't remember, a few years ago. It was like the biggest riot that we'd had, in decades.
Yeah.
And it was really scary. People were like smashing, all over the place. It was all over the place.
I remember it.
And it was getting closer and closer to our house. We lived in like Highgate at the time, and we were watching on the news. Really scared. It's like, fuck, they're getting closer. They're in Camden. No, now they're in Islington. Oh shit, they're getting closer. They're getting closer. And we lived at the top of this quite high hill at the time, Highgate West Hill, which is like probably the steepest hill in London. And you know what? The riot got to the bottom of the hill and didn't go up the hill. They just carried on. And I was thinking, if they were like grains of sand, they'd have gone up the hill.
I disagree, sir. It's the path of least resistance. It flows like water. Thermodynamics, the whole thing. It's wild, man. The parallels are extraordinary.
I hear what you're saying. I do hear what you're saying. But the one thing I would also add is that some people who are anti-Gustave Le Bon, some anti-crowd theorists, would say that if we think of the crowd as just this sort of thoughtless mass, then the downside of that is we're not listening to any concerns that they had. Like sometimes people riot for political reasons and so on. So it can be used as a sort of form of social control.
And I've heard you take Q&A. There's a Q&A that's part of your show that you're bringing to Australia on your tour. And I've heard you take Q&A, and I've heard questions I heard this particular one question that was like, wow, that lady bought a ticket, waited in line, and then stood up, knowing what the thousands, hundreds of people in the room were going to think of her, and she just went on this full tirade. And the way that I have to applaud you, because you modeled a really extraordinary way of communicating with someone who was clearly afraid and clearly believed very much what she was talking about. I don't know if people are going to ask you those questions in Australia, but the Q&A part of the show, do you look forward to it? Do you worry about stuff?
Yeah, and in fact, that woman that you're talking about, that doesn't happen very often. Yeah, she stood up and basically said, yeah, no, I'm glad I did too. And in fact, I said to my producer, we have to leave that in.
Yeah.
She basically does this whole thing about, 5G towers and, COVID conspiracies. I'm like I'm trying to stop her. And then finally I said, look, I've got to stop here. And she goes, typical BBC.
Yeah.
And I said, no, this isn't the BBC trying to silence truth teller. This is the fact that there's 400 people in this room and I've got to look after their, welfare. Like, some people don't want to listen to a great big long, irksome rant that's a statement to not a question. And it did make me think, and I'm not saying that this woman was a narcissist, but it did make me think that what was going on here was a battle between the individual and the institution. She thought I, as, a representative of the BBC, was like shutting her down. And I was like, no, I have to look after the 400 people in the room and, and keep this conversation, keep this event going. And it did make me think, as institutions crumble, narcissists thrive.
And the antidote to all of it is just kind of knowing what you're looking at, I guess. And your work has really helped me, at least, understand a lot more of what those traits look like when they are in a leadership position or a company's policy or a person standing up asking a question. I don't try. It helps me not dehumanize it so much, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, I really appreciate that. But the other answer to your question is, I especially by the time I come to Australia, I'm hoping it's not going to be all psychopaths and mental health stuff. Like, I think I'm going to tell some stories about, the time I went UFO hunting with Robbie Williams or tried to sneak into Bohemian Grove with Alex Jones. Like if the night turns into that stuff too, count me in,
Was it, now I want to know, was it Nebworth backstage at Oasis, Robbie? Was it?
No, it was hiring a private plane.
Call me Robbie.
Well, I definitely called him Rob. It was 20. It was around 20.
Oh, don't spoil it. Don't spoil it. I want to hear it on the night.
I will tell you the story on the night. I've got to say, it's pretty much the best story I've got. So I hope to tell it. It's a top tier anecdote.
Jon, you're an absolute delight, and thank you so much for making the time to do this. I'm thrilled you're coming to our country again. It's been a while. It'll be an interesting time. You're here right around the American election, so it'll be fascinating. And no matter what.
Absolutely.
And it's an interesting time to be alive.
I'm super excited to come back. Yeah. I always love coming back.
I'm glad we're alive in this world at the same time. Because a voice like yours helps me feel less nuts. And though it is a bit too early for me to be on taking my medication today. Don't get me wrong, I have been nuts, and so to spend time with you is a real treat and makes me feel a lot less insane. So thank you so much, Jon.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you. And another speaking, now that I'm talking to you in Australia, I'll tell you something else that makes me feel a little bit less nuts. Amyl and the Sniffers, my new favorite band.
How amazing!
Fucking
band. Awesome! Yeah. Fucking
aren't they
sick? They are proper.
I love them. Amyl and the Sniffers and Chapel Roan are the two greatest things that have come out of music in the last few years.
I couldn't agree with you more. That video, that one that they do at the Clueless liquor store in North Hollywood, is fucking. She is great. She is electric.
She's incredible.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Well, I hope you see them when you come out, man.
I hope so too. They were playing in New York, but doors were at 8. And then there was 2 support bands till they came on. And I thought, I'm not going to stay up till half 10.
Mate, I'm 50 years old, and after going around the world with a AAA around my neck, I'm like, when's the gig? When's the how much laminate's on my ticket and how many A's are on it? No, thank you. I'm going to go home and watch Curb Your Enthusiasm.
I feel exactly the same way. I'm going to have to wait until Amyl and the Sniffers are a legacy band and go on at 7:30, so I'll be seeing them in 40 years' time.
This is the way. Have a great night, mate. See you later.
You too. Great talking.